Well, absolute pleasure to be sitting here this morning with the one and only, and I want to say the one and only, Frank Gilfeather, boxer, former journalist, um, internet star. Frank, you've got your Frank's Noble Art on Instagram. I'm a subscriber myself. How did it come about that you decided to put your coaching, if you like, your love of boxing, your presence, coaching young and old people onto Instagram?
Well, the Instagram thing came kind of later in the day. TikTok was the one that kicked it off. I was in the gym at one Sunday morning in a local gym here in Aberdeen, and there's a young guy who had just turned professional. He was only 18. He's just about to have his sixth pro fight. He's had five unbeaten. There's a guy called Gregor McPherson. And I used to train down at the gym that was owned by his dad. And my son, Paul, would come with me. And he said to me, "Go and show me how to throw an uppercut on this wall-mounted bag." And so I started doing it. He videoed it. He said, "I'm going to put this on TikTok." Well, I said, "Yeah, fine." We didn't grasp the potential enormity of it. And before long, the TikTok thing just zoomed. It was fantastic. And we used to post occasionally on Instagram, but found that that was a harder nut to crack. And then all of a sudden, virtually overnight, well, listen, if I tell you this, Gareth, less than 5 months ago, I had 170 Instagram followers. Today, I've got 405,000. So the Instagram thing, once it caught hold, it was like wildfire. It went incredibly crazy, and the feedback is what pleases me.
Yeah, well, I was saying to you before we started recording, one of the things that comes across so powerfully is your insistence on execution when you're boxing, that you're not playing it. And it's such a beautiful thing to watch you throw that cross and turn your body over and say, do that, and then see 10, 12-year-olds all doing it. Yeah. And you're going, that's the guy. That's the guy. Yeah. He's got it. And your passion for it. And I'll mention age, because one of the astounding things is that you're 78, yes. And yet physically, all your tensile strength seems to be there. I'm sure you have aches and pains like we all do, but when you are boxing, there seems to be cortisol in you, adrenaline in you that belies your years, and it's one of the phenomenal things about you, I think.
Thank you. Well, lots of people, of course, mention the age, and that's fine, because sometimes I can't quite believe it. But you know what? People have said to me, "Why don't you take it a little easier, for example, on the punch bag?" And my answer is, I do not know how to take it easier. If they say go on the punch bag, then that's me. I do it the way I did it all those years ago when I started boxing. And so for me, it's a proper workout. It's not just, tippy-tappy and looking good. And I think as far as the teaching is concerned, I think what I always planned to do was explain why we do things. And not just say, you get these coaches go on the bag and they'll point to a young guy and say, "This is what you do, bang, 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 bang," and then they'll walk away. But they haven't explained why. And you know what? I found a lack of teaching in boxing as opposed to coaching. Why do we throw a punch like this? Why do we block? Why are we not thinking about defense? And this is the big thing I feel in the gyms that I've been around. Few coaches actually talk about defense. They talk about attack all the time. But of course, the defense is number one. There is no point, I tell kids, there is no point in going into a contest, winning it, but having taken a heap of blows in the process. There is no point in that. It's all about the violent chess, as I call it, the skill, the outwitting your opponent. That for me is what it's about.
I watched a video of yours analysing Floyd Mayweather a couple of days ago. And I'll say, in my 33 years covering boxing, he's the greatest I've seen live. And I think I've watched him live about 20 times in his fights. And you don't want to look down at we'll talk about this, but you don't want to look down at your notebook or your laptop and write while he's boxing, because you don't want to miss a second, because you only get to see him live once in that moment.
Yes, exactly.
It struck a chord with me, because people always ask me who's the best boxer you've seen. I mean, other fighters really thrill me. Hagler thrills me. Mike Tyson thrills me. Deontay Wilder thrills me. Anthony Joshua thrills me. Tyson Fury. But to watch someone pure, Mayweather was unreal. Yes. And that's to your point, that defensively he was extraordinary while he was still putting pressure on his opponents, you know?
Yeah, he had this incredible ability to do that, where he was in charge psychologically of every contest he was in that you could think about anyway. So it was a thought process with him. And he, some people can do that, but they can take it to extreme. And by that, I mean that they're actually scared or too apprehensive. So many of these kinds of boxers will be on their way back before actually landing the punch, because their initial thought there is to not be hurt. So you've got to find a balance whereby you can hurt your opponent, but be out of harm's way. And that's, as you know, if you watch amateur boxing, it's fencing with gloves on. And, sometimes they hardly touch each other. Their punches fall way short, because it's this so-called Olympic-style boxing that they call it. It's like a rapier. I'll touch you with a punch, but, and I mean touch you, not hurt you. And I'll be off, 3 feet backwards. Whereas Mayweather, and this is what I say to young kids, you could be out of danger by 2 inches. That's all you need. A sway back and you're out of danger. And the guy's punch falls short as he tries to reach you. So it's trying to get into kids that you have to overcome this kind of apprehension and do it. And this is what Mayweather was brilliant at. I mean, his jabs, he could be just within, touching distance of you, and you had no idea that he was going to throw this rapier-like jab and connect really firmly, and then sway back, and he was 2 inches out of danger. So he had this special thing.
And that's why his right cross from nowhere. From nowhere.
Yes. Exactly. And the right cross, I've got an issue with this, because everybody in amateur boxing throws a straight arm. And honestly, way back in the early days, 2 years ago when I started TikTok, I did a video on the wall-mounted bag, and I cited Anthony Joshua as being a guy I thought had not fulfilled his potential at that point. Well, 2 years ago, despite having won world titles and so on. I always thought he could be better. One of the flaws I found in him was, in my view, his inability to throw a proper cross. And so I did, and I've done a series of videos about the cross, as you probably know. It used to infuriate me when I saw guys throwing a straight arm cross. And so I did this kind of critique of Joshua in that video. And I said, if only he would do this, and as you mentioned earlier, turn head
from the
and
body
into
the punch. It makes sense. It's the motion. Of course. Yeah.
And as you know, he did it. He did it. And I've said to boxers, and I get questions from lots of young professional boxers. Can you come and coach me? Can I come to you? And so on. And one of the things I wanted to get over to them was that cross. Go and look at Marciano. Go and look at Thomas Hearns, Hagler, all these guys. Every one of them, Mayweather, you mentioned, never throw a straight arm cross. So I think that message hopefully is getting over.
I want to talk about you now, specifically you. Years and years ago, I went to live in China for a year and studied some martial arts. And my teachers were in their 70s then, and I would have been a young man of 22. So many years ago. And the teachers were all in their 70s and they had done wushu with a kun, a stick, for 70 years. And the movements in 6 months of study of wushu, for example, with a stick, the kun, we learned about 8 movements. Yeah. Yes. Because their whole thing is to be a master in something, you need to do it for 70 years. And that won't have been lost on you. And you are a true master of boxing, having done it for just over 70 years, I believe, you know. So
yes.
A little bit on you. How did I'm assuming you did other sports, you played other sports as well. And I obviously know that you've been a correspondent covering Aberdeen and a news journalist, and I want to go and get into that as well. But how did your love of boxing begin, and how old were you? Weren't you 7 or something?
I was 7 when I had a contest, what they call nowadays in amateur boxing, they call it a skills contest. In fact, it's an exhibition. And it was like, it was the opener to a tournament that my dad ran, because my dad ran boxing clubs for decades in Dundee, where I come from. And he said, okay, you can go on the bill. There was another 7-year-old guy. And it was it was a warm up for the crowd. It was like a stand-up comedian going on before a concert or something. And so, but what that did was it gave me a thrill of actually doing it in front of an audience. But I had been going to the boxing club since I was 4. My dad had a boxing club, and it was about half a mile walk from where we lived. And we're talking about 1950 here. And all these guys in their white vests and the horsehair boxing gloves with the padding all kind of shoved up and down and bare knuckles practically. And so being in that environment, you know, where we had old sailors' kit bags filled with sawdust, that was the punch bag.
Wow.
Being in that environment, it grew on me. I had 2 older brothers, Dennis, who was 9 years older than me. He boxed for Scotland many times and also was a Scottish champion. And Daniel, who is 11 years older than me, Daniel was a British youth champion way back in 1949. And he was too young for me to remember boxing. He was told by my dad, because he was starting to discover girls and go out with the lads and the dancing and all that. And my dad said, "Look, if you're not going to do it properly, then give it up." And he gave it up. But he, by all accounts, he was a star for his age. So that kind of, I went to the boxing club every time it was open with my dad. And then, you know, it kind of developed. And when he gave up, I joined another club, the St. Francis Club, actually 65 years old, that club this year. I was one of the founder members, and that's still on the go. So I had a kind of, it was in my DNA, Gareth. It was a everyday thing. I played football a bit for the school, under 16s and all that, but it didn't kind of grab me as much as boxing.
Do you play rugby as well?
No, I didn't. Right. No, rugby up here was played in the private schools. No rugby in kind of comprehensive schools. So
I can imagine you playing rugby though as well, committing.
Really, I can't. It's too brutal.
Okay, well, there you go. Okay. So during your boxing career, did you? I mean, I've heard and read, I think, that you did box Ken Buchanan.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, Ken Buchanan and I was same age. I think he was a month older than me, and so the different times in terms of every country had an international boxing team, so you wanted to be in that team. And I was a featherweight, he was a featherweight, and we were vying for the vest, if you like, the Scotland vest. And you know, these were great occasions because at home you would box in the Kelvin Hall, and and then you would go away mainly to Eastern European countries, and you'd box over there twice. You know, you'd box on the Thursday and the Saturday. So I boxed against Denmark in Copenhagen on the Thursday, and then on the Saturday in a place called Aalborg. Ken Buchanan, his club were saying, well, he has a, you know, he has a claim to be in the team. So we had a fight in Leith Town Hall, which was a stone's throw from Buchanan's home. 1,200 people, and the atmosphere was electric. It was fantastic. I did a stupid thing, or at least my trainer must have done it. It was a guy called Jim Brady, who had been the British Empire bantamweight champion way back in the days of Benny Lynch and so on. And we didn't have, this is how primitive things were. We didn't have a set of scales in the boxing club. So Jim Brady had an antique set of jockey's scales, you know, the ones you sit on, in his home. So every now and again, we had to make 9 stone 2. The fight was made at 9 stone 2, 2 pounds over the limit. But I tried so hard because I was more comfortable about 9-4. I was beginning to edge towards being a lightweight. And we would test every now and again at Jim's house, and the weight was coming. I was very keen that I wouldn't go to Edinburgh and be overweight, and there'd be no fight. I overdid it. I went on the scales at 8 stone 13. Buchanan was 9 stone 2 on the dot. Anyway, it was a great fight. I mean, I even felt it was a tremendous fight. He had this incredible left jab, as you know, which could go on for 15 rounds, as we saw when he was a professional world champion. And it was like a piston pumping out of you. So Mike, and I was a little bit shorter, a shorter reach. My thing was I had to get inside that. And I can remember
4 threes, 3 threes?
No, 3 threes.
3 threes.
3 threes.
Yeah.
And I can remember it well. I've got to get under his jab. And I can remember, because I'd perfected this in training leading up to this fight, I would go under it inside to my left and thump him in the ribs or in the heart. This is what I wanted. I want to punch him in the heart to slow him down. And I did that, and I could hear him now wincing every time I did it, you know. But it was a great fight. It was a points decision, which he won, and that was fine. But he did a very clever thing, or at least the guys who ran his club, the Sparta Boxing Club, we said, right, it was close, it was good, it was a crowd pleaser. I want to, you know, we'd agreed I could have a return match, and it never happened. He always, I'm not saying that he was avoiding me. If I'd been in his position, I would have avoided me, because why go back? You know, I've beaten you. Why would I give you another opportunity to beat me? But the good thing about that was that he stayed featherweight. I moved up to lightweight. Nick McTaggart, who was a lightweight, had moved up to light welterweight. So there, the 3 of us were in the Scotland team. What a fantastic team that was.
Yeah.
And we traveled, you know, all over the place, and had wonderful occasions together, mainly against Eastern European countries. We went to the European Championships in East Berlin in 1965. And that was
the year I was born.
Was it?
Yes.
Now you make me feel I was 19. And going, you know, you think, thinking of it now, Berlin Wall had been up 25 years.
Yeah.
And there we are, young guys, kids, being marched through checkpoint Charlie,
Yeah.
into the east, and in great kind of wonderment that the guards have got their guns and their Alsatians, and the guys are up on the watchtower. Yeah. The watchtowers with the binoculars and all that. It was really incredible, and in a way exciting.
Yeah. So do you, this is maybe an unusual question, but I mean, because it doesn't seem that you're at all unfulfilled with your boxing career, but do you wish you'd done more? Do you wish you had been able to go to the Olympics, turn pro? Because
Well,
obviously you went a different you went a different route, didn't you? So is
yes,
there anything
yeah.
unfulfilled when you look back?
I suppose I had a couple of raw deals and pieces of bad luck. I remember well boxing in the quarterfinals of the ABA Championship, and we did it at the Bellevue Arena in Manchester against the Northern Counties, and then the winners would have gone to the semi-finals down at Wembley. I remember walking into the ring, and the guy called John Henderson, who was the General Secretary of the governing body in Scotland, said to me as I walked into the ring, you know, you'll have, tongue in cheek, you know, you'll have to knock out this guy to win.
Mm.
And I said, why? And he said, because we've just had 3 wins on the trot. John McCluskey, who went on to become the British flyweight champion professionally, John McCluskey, Bobby Mallon, Ken Buchanan, then me as a lightweight. And what they did in those days was they alternated the judges. So that there would be 2 Northern Counties judges and 1 Scot, and the referee would be a Scot to kind of balance it up. Then next contest, it would be different. I was unlucky. I got the one with the 2 Northern Counties judges, and I fought a guy called Tommy Wright. And it was televised live. Harry Carpenter had said, that's another win for Scotland. And then the decision was announced.
Really?
The guy got it 2-1. And that happened to me a couple of times. I should have gone to the Commonwealth Games in Jamaica, which was when, 1966, I think. And again, I got a bum steer there. But that's all about
Well, you
politics.
say that, but we shouldn't accept those things in our sport either,
No,
because
but I hate to hear guys going on about I was robbed here and I was robbed, and I never say that. I mean, I've said it to you now, but I rarely say that. But thinking back, I got the Commonwealth
rough
Games,
deal.
which I would have been confident of winning a medal that time. I was at my peak, but I got a really bad deal before going there in the trials. In the Scottish Championship, which I was defending, I boxed a guy called Robert Porteous, who we had a clash of heads, like within 30 seconds of the contest. And I wasn't a guy prone to cuts, but he cut me on the left eyelid. And the referee stopped it immediately, went to the changing room, and the doctor stitched it on the spot. And so our guy said, well, hang on a second. The champions would go to the Commonwealth Games. This guy went and became the champion. You've got to be fair here. So we had a return match. And I outpointed him, by a mile. And then their guy said, oh, we'll have to have a third match. Why? But we had a third match, and it was heavily loaded in his favor in terms of the judges. And he got the decision. Why? I do not know. Well, I do not know.
There's a lot of, I mean, without going too deeply into this, it's a massive subject. There is, we all have different views on fights sometimes. I mean, for example, in Saudi Arabia recently, I thought Parker and Zhang was a draw. Taylor and Catterall was a very close fight, very scrappy, close fight. I thought Catterall just won it.
Yes.
But again, if you look at the way the internet is now and social media is now, people can be swayed by commentary. People can be swayed very easily by doing the eye test on a contest and not scoring it round by round in discrete units. It's a very complex thing, isn't it? But I do think around Olympics and Commonwealth Games and World Amateurs, I do think it needs cleaning up. You went into journalism. I'm fascinated by this, of course. How long were you a journalist?
Oh, I was a journalist until May last year.
Why did you stop?
Well, I'll tell you why. I haven't really. It's like, what do they say in acting? You don't retire. You just don't nobody picks up the phone. But what happened was, you will appreciate this, Gareth. The newspaper industry has changed
Oh, yes.
dramatically,
Yeah.
over the decades. I mean, I had grown up thinking when I was 15, nobody could beat me at 15, 16, 17. I was boxing senior guys when I was 16. Guys like Freddie Owen, who was a Commonwealth Games bronze medalist, and I was beating them. And so it went on, and I had my focus on becoming a professional. But when I was 19, I was at a dinner. I'm going off script here, if you like. I was at a dinner which the Daily Record newspaper had staged to mark the winning of the World Flyweight Championship by Walter McGowan. And I was McGowan's kind of major sparring partner from the age of 15, because his dad said, "You're the only guy that can make him think." And we were at a table. There was me, John Cowboy McCormack, who had briefly been the British middleweight champion. He beat Terry Downs on a disqualification. And guys like John O'Brien, Chick Calderwood, and Peter Keenan, who was the main promoter in Scotland, himself a superior professional boxer in his day. And Keenan said to me, he turned to me, this was funny. He turned to me, and it wasn't a question, it was a statement. He said, "I'll tell you what's going to happen, Frankie," because that's what everybody called me. He said, "You'll go to London, Al Phillips will manage you, and you'll box for Harry Levine, Mickey Duff, and Mike Barrett, that kind of cartel down in London." He said, "Then in Scotland, you'll box for me at Paisley Ice Rink." I used to go to his shows, 5,000 people there every time. And I just smiled. And he said, "So are you comfortable with that?" And I said, "Not really." I said, "I'm looking around this table, Peter, and the guy who's wearing the mohair suit, drinking the Napoleon brandy and smoking the Havana cigar is the promoter." I said, "The boxers don't have that kind of luxury." So it kind of hit me that night. These are the guys who are making money, and the boxers who are doing all the heavy lifting and the hard work, they're the ones who are ending up with sore heads and broken careers and very little money. And it was that night I decided, nah, this isn't for me.
The emperor,
Yeah,
and the gladiators, always,
yes,
back in history. I mean, I'm a student of it all. In
yep,
500 AD, Theodoric, the emperor of Rome, decided no more noble men and women can be gladiators. There'd been 1,000 of them by that point. No more nobles, because we need them in the Senate. It's a noble pursuit. It will relate to your feelings about all these things. But at the end of the day, and you look back, and even up to now, immigrants fighting for their freedom, moving into another country, the Poles, the Jews, the Irish, the Italians in America, the Latin Americans. Same here, with the Poles and the Jews. People came here after wars, the Italians, East End, people moving, they're like in Wales, the Italians moving to Wales, the Italians moving to Scotland, all those people fighting for their freedom. And I think the promoter will always be the emperor, Frank.
Yes, of course. And the sad thing is, I come from Dundee, as I say, and that was the city of jute jam and journalism. And it was the biggest producer of jute in the world. It had 130 jute mills.
Wow.
And the largest of which was a stone's throw from where we were brought up, the Cox family. And they were mega. You've got, in many ways, you admire them because they had the biggest jute mill. It was almost like a village. It had its own school, its own network of roads within the complex. But
sounds like a communist Danway. That's how it was in China. They had the school, the factory, the housing, the sports complex all together.
Yeah. And there was where my dad was brought up was a place in Lochee, which is the district where we came from, which was just called Tipperary because it was all Irish and Glasgow Irish and Catholic immigrants. And and they worked in the jute mills, and so they were, and it was terrible housing, and
So
so you
people were
had
naturally tough.
yes,
Yeah.
but they had to find ways, the men particularly, because the women worked in the jute mills, and the men were largely unemployed. And they had to find ways to earn money. And they did that through the boxing booths.
Wow.
And
Yeah,
they
of
would,
course.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I mentioned a guy the other day who was a lovely man. I knew him when he was older, a man called Freddie Tennant. His brother Norman fought for the British Flyweight Championship against a guy called Terry Allen, and from London. And Freddie was such a crowd pleaser that he must have had 150, 200 fights. He went to London and he boxed 3 times a week in places like the York Hall and other places in the East End because he was such a big favourite with the crowd. But he would walk, when he was in Dundee, he would walk 15, 20 miles to the boxing booth,
Yeah.
wherever it was, to get fights and to earn money. So you're absolutely spot on with your analysis there of the gladiators and the bosses, the kings, the emperors.
Yeah, I was with Jack Trickett when he was kind of promoting or managing. Do you remember Jack Trickett?
Yes.
And Jack used to box in the booths, and he put his younger siblings through private school in the end because they were a lot younger than him, through boxing in the booths. We've got 5 minutes left, and in those 5 minutes, I want to ask you about 4 questions. So I'm timing you to a minute and answer. The journalism. Tell me about the journalism. Did that fulfill? Because you have a great lucidity when you speak and when you explain and when you teach, and a very inquiring mind, as I can see. Did the journalism fulfill those things in you?
Oh, yes, yes, it did. Absolutely. I was a news reporter for about 6 years. Then the editor of the evening paper I worked on thought it was a good idea for me to do sport. And in many ways, I regret that because I loved the news aspect. Sport, fine, I said I would do it. And he promoted me within a very short time, which basically stopped me from going back to news. And then from there, I went into regional television for many, many years, doing news stuff, but mainly sport. And then, since Sky Sports came into Scotland with football coverage, I became a football reporter as a freelance with them while working for all the national papers as a football writer. And I traveled all over Europe, mainly with Aberdeen when in the days of Sir Alex Ferguson.
Great fun.
And
Great fun.
our
Yeah.
difficult relationship he and I had.
Okay.
Because as many of us in the media recognize, he didn't actually love the media as much as many people would think. So yeah, that was an interesting verbal sparring, and he was an unpredictable guy, but a remarkable man. But sometimes you get these geniuses who have kind of ways of dealing with the media.
What did boxing teach you about journalism, or what has journalism taught you about boxing?
Well, I don't know if I could link them,
Stamina?
Gareth, but
Stamina?
stamina, yes. But I think my dad taught me everything. Not specifically sitting me down and saying, you do this, you do that. Although he did that with boxing. He wasn't a coach, but he just made me think, why do we do this? Why would you put your hand here in front of your chin? We know why. So he taught me authenticity, if you like, and just by listening to him, and humility. And this is what really bugs me about boxing today: the lack of
That's my
humility.
last question. And we've only got 2 minutes before this cuts off. So tell me about your views on boxing today. Yes.
Well, boxing today has become a circus, largely. And we've gone into the realms of entertainment, which is fine. But I think, the boxing fan who largely is knowledgeable, wants to see boxing. Does he want to see 20 minutes from a guy coming from 300 yards away, with flashing lights into the ring and announcers that give you every detail. What the guy's girlfriend works in the post office, and his inside leg measurement is 33, and all that. You get all this rolled out, and I'm thinking the boxers have warmed up now. They're cooling down. The crowd are desperate for the fight to start. Let's knock out all of this kind of nonsense around boxing. Let's do it the way they used to do it in the old days.
Fury Usyk, who wins?
Usyk. I've been asked this before, and Usyk's a boxer. Fury is not. He doesn't like my fire. He's a 1-2 merchant grab, 1-2 grab, and that's obvious. He's 20 stone. He's 6'9". He has zero mobility. He's got to land the punches, then grab. I think Fury may just be slightly going over the hill.
Finally, Frank, are you still going to be doing what you're doing in 10 years' time?
Well, 10 years, no, that's a big ask. If I'm doing it in 5 years' time, I'll be really happy. As long as the big thing for me, Gareth, is to demonstrate what I'm doing, not just do this. If a kid sees how it's done, it's easy for him to replicate.
Frank, it's an absolute pleasure to speak to you. I want to close this properly and cleanly. We will speak again, I hope. Yeah, because it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today.
Gareth, I'm delighted to meet you for the first time. I hope it won't be long before we're shaking hands face